I never imagined that I would end up ruining marriage, but here I am. I'm 32-year-old Vicky from Michigan, and I need to talk about this. You've probably said something you can't take back at some point. Yes, I did experience one of those, and it essentially blew apart my life. However, since I still don't believe I'm solely at fault for this, let me begin at the beginning. 3 years ago, during my friend Melissa's wedding, I got to know Henry. He was filling in for another groomsman who became unwell at the last minute, so he wasn't even expected to be there. I became aware of the difference between him and his brother Chase at that point. You know, unlike most men, Henry didn't attempt to be the focus of attention. He had this quiet thing going on. Additionally, he stood out from the dull accountants and salespeople I typically saw because he was a pilot for a commercial aircraft. However, Chase was the life of the party. He was the first person I noticed, kept everyone laughing, and was familiar with all the newest TikTok routines. However, it was who really took action. Chase was busy amusing everyone else when he asked for my number. I recall finding his directness to be kind of endearing. Before one of his trips, we went on our first date to this small brunch spot close to the airport. We spoke for hours while he ordered this absurd quantity of food. Pilot thing, apparently. He genuinely listened when I shared my aspirations of starting yoga studio, which set him apart from the men I typically dated. Most of the men merely nodded, but Henry began to inquire about location scouting and business ideas. The pilot's pay didn't hurt either, I'll confess. The thought of having that type of security was quite alluring after I had been fighting to make ends meet while teaching yoga at other people's facilities. In addition, I would have a lot of free time while he was away for flights. It appeared ideal. Looking back, the wedding may have gone by too quickly. However, you start to feel this strain when you're in your 30s, you know? My younger sister had recently given birth to her second child, and my mother was constantly sending me papers about fertility dwindling beyond the age of 35. Henry appeared to be the ideal combination of a secure career, a loving family, and genuine support for my aspirations to start a yoga business. It became problematic when Chase became Henry's best man. The three of us spent a lot of time together while we were preparing the wedding. When Henry was on long-haul flights, Chase would come over with takeout and say he was checking on his future sister-in-law. I would laugh off his little jokes about my being too lighthearted for his serious brother, but I couldn't help but remember them. Chase's best man speech is what I remember most from the lovely event. He related how he was the jerk who couch surfed and bartended, whereas Henry had always been the responsible one who made their parents proud. However, the way he spoke, it seemed as though he took pride in being the enjoyable one, the spirit of freedom. Instead of my realistic pilot, I found myself imagining what life might be like with someone like that. Real life began to settle in after the honeymoon. Henry had a harsh routine, 3 days at home, 4 days away, and so on. I poured myself into starting my yoga studio, but I was surprised by how difficult operating a business actually is. Henry made an effort to assist with the books, but his recommendations judgmental. If he were to reply, maybe start smaller, build up gradually. However, I had a vision. From the beginning, I wanted it to be flawless. Chase began to appear more frequently after that. He said he was in the area and stopped by the studio with coffee. He was my Instagram follower and was always the first to like and comment on my postings. Chase would remark things like, "That's Henry for you, always in the clouds, never on the ground where the real stuff happens," when I would gripe about Henry's extended absences. In hindsight, I ought to have recognized the warning indicators. When Chase's name appeared on my phone, I would become delighted. On days when I knew he may visit the studio, I would find myself dressing up a bit more. In my mind, I would contrast Henry's meticulous preparation with Chase's impromptu behavior and Henry's quietness with Chase's continuous dialogue. But I made a case for everything. Chase was merely being amiable and Henry was frequently absent. They were brothers, too. After all, nothing was going to happen, was it? Having a tight relationship with my brother-in-law wasn't a bad thing. That's what I told myself anyway. The fact is that I was imagining what life may have been like if Chase had been chosen over Henry. Every time Henry missed a social function, due to work, every time he questioned a business expense at the studio, or every time he arrived home exhausted from a flight and just wanted to sleep, I would consider how Chase may have handled the situation differently. I began paying more attention to Chase's social media accounts, enjoying his updates about the bar where he worked and his tales of the wild evenings and entertaining patrons. Henry, meanwhile, claimed to have enough screens in the cockpit and hardly utilized social media. It was just another characteristic that set them apart. My friends saw how I had changed. At Melissa's baby shower, the person whose wedding initiated this whole situation, I was actually pulled aside. Her words, "You seem different around Chase," Vicky said. "Be careful, Vicky." I dismissed her. Henry was my spouse, and I was devoted to him. Chase was simply Chase, a friend, even a member of the family. However, the distinction between proper and inappropriate became less clear each time Henry went for another flight. Chase sent another amusing meme, or swung by with my favorite cold brew, not because I would see my husband, but because I knew Chase would be there with his stories, his jokes, and his ability to make me feel like the most person in the room. I began to look forward to family get-togethers. I had no idea that I was putting myself in danger. I was unaware of how my naive friendship and harmless flirtation were gradually ruining my marriage. I was too busy telling myself that I was worthy of Chase's enthusiasm and Henry's stability. I was too preoccupied with playing with fire and blaming Henry's absences for my developing intimacy with his brother to realize that I was going to get burned. Half a year into the marriage, things really began to go south. Longer distances from home resulted from Henry's airline adding additional international routes. Sure, the money was better, but I was spending most of my evenings by myself in our new home, watching Chase's stories and browsing social media. While I was stuck at home running a failing yoga studio, he always seemed to be having so much fun. I began making up reasons to see Chase more frequently. In an attempt to broaden my yoga network, I would enroll in evening courses at his gym, which is conveniently close to his bar. When Henry saw the accusations, I informed him that Chase would stay after his workouts and we would go out to dinner, discussing everything and nothing. Unlike Henry, he was able to relate to my difficulties with the studio. Chase would advise me to follow my passion and say that money wasn't everything, while Henry would offer sensible alternatives like raising pricing or shrinking class sizes. The studio was losing money. Assuming that Instagram-worthy aesthetics would attract customers, I maxed out 2 credit cards to purchase expensive equipment and opulent decor. I became defensive when Henry began to interrogate me about the company's finances. I snarled, "You're never here anyway." At that point, the covert meetings with Chase began. What do you care how I run things? After all, he was a bar owner, so I convinced myself it was for business advice. However, we were both aware that really a pretext. Far from his typical hangouts, we would meet in this peaceful coffee shop on the other side of town. He would listen to me gripe about Henry's lack of attendance, his infatuation with cost-cutting, and his inability to comprehend my studio vision. The way Chase would lean in close and whisper, "Henry's always been like that. All work and no play. Remember that time he missed your studio's opening party because of a last-minute flight?" Naturally, I recalled. Instead, Chase had been there to greet my first clients and make everyone laugh with his goofy yoga position efforts. We increased the frequency and length of our SMS exchanges. I began to hide the screen of my phone while Henry was home and check it all the time. I saved all the music Chase sent me that made him think of me, amusing yoga memes and photos of sunsets taken from the rooftop of the bar with captions like, "Wish you were here to see this." I believe Henry saw the shift in me. When he was at home, he made an effort to make supper and arrange date nights, but I was already drifting away. In some way, everything he did seemed wrong. His useful contributions seemed careless. Chase would leave small treats at the studio, like my favorite, energy drinks and adorable training tanks he had spotted at the shopping center. The financial problems grew worse. I continued to conceal purchases from Henry by claiming they were necessary for business. Chase supported this by saying that Henry was overly controlling with money and that I deserved pleasant things. Henry was incensed when he learned that I had renovated our meditation room with our holiday money. His words were, "You're acting like a teenager." I said, "This isn't sustainable," and drove directly to Chase's bar. Chase and I chatted until closing time that evening. He listened to me vent about Henry's domineering ways while mixing me elegant cocktails. "You're too good for this," he murmured, putting his hand over the bar to mine. I sensed a change in our relationship that evening based on the way he looked at me. "You deserve someone who gets you." Henry attempted to have a serious discussion about our finances the following day. I had concealed more credit card statements, which he had discovered. I flipped it on him rather than taking responsibility for my errors. "Maybe if you were home more, I wouldn't need to spend money to feel better," I replied. For the first time, I felt genuine hurt in Henry's eyes as he said, "Chase understands that people need more than just practicality to be happy." Quieter than normal, he departed without saying goodbye for a 3-day flight. I reminded myself that he was exaggerating. When I called Chase crying about it, he agreed with me. We sat on the couch watching awful reality TV until 2 and he came over that evening with wine and takeout. In hindsight, I can understand how things got out of hand. I would run to Chase if Henry questioned my choices. Chase was always there, when Henry wasn't. I began comparing them all the time. How Henry would inquire about the prices of my new yoga attire while Chase would remark on how nice it was. How Chase would bring me lunch on the spur of the moment while Henry stayed within our prearranged dining out budget. A family supper at Henry's parents' place was the beginning of the breaking point. After 3 clients terminated their memberships due to the exorbitant fees, I had a difficult week at the studio. I was still upset that Henry had tried to cut the charges once more. I didn't hold back when his mother pulled out the alcohol. Sitting opposite from me, Chase was telling everyone about his bar's crazy bachelor celebration. Probably exhausted after his travel, Henry was silent and picked at his supper. I was brazen because of the wine. I began to lean forward when Chase spoke and touched his arm when he handed the salt because I was laughing too much at his jokes. Speaking louder than I should have, I asked, "Remember when you came to my studio opening?" Henry's jaw tensed as I said, "Chase actually showed up, unlike someone." I persisted. Chase shifted uneasily, but I was feeling good. "He even tried doing yoga. You should have seen him in Downward Dog," I said. All of my repressed annoyances were leaking out as the wine hit hard. For example, Chase never misses my classes when he's free, unlike my own husband, and who is constantly too busy taking flights. Henry's mother attempted to divert the conversation by inquiring about my parents' impending visit, but I was unable to resist. "What's humorous, do you?" Compared to Henry, Chase is more knowledgeable about my company. Instead of merely shoving financial issues in my face, he genuinely pays attention when I discuss them. There was silence at the table. Unable to read his face, Henry set down his fork. I wasn't finished when his father cleared his throat and began discussing the weather. I felt a strong desire to harm Henry and give him the same sense of neglect that I had. I swirled my wine and said, "It must run in the family." Except for Chase, I'm emotionally unavailable. I suppose that one brother had to inherit everyone's personality. Chase got to his feet suddenly. He was unable to look at me early shift tomorrow. Henry excused himself and left, despite his mother's best efforts to persuade him to stay for dessert. After he left, there was an overwhelming silence. On the way home, Henry remained silent. I filled the void with resentful remarks about his family's oversensitivity and their lack of acceptance of me. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, but he simply kept his eyes on the road. I thought there would be a fight when we got home. I desired one. Rather, Henry simply gazed at me with a dejected and resigned expression that made my stomach turn. "We need to talk about what's going on with you and Chase," he said quietly. I got on the defense immediately. "There's nothing going on. We're friends. He's my brother-in-law. Am I not allowed to have a relationship with your family?" "A relationship, yes. But what you're doing, this isn't that." "What exactly am I doing, Henry? Being friendly? Having actual conversations? Showing emotions like a normal person instead of walking around like some robot?" He merely shook his head. "You know exactly what you're doing, Vicky. And so does everyone else?" That made me furious. "Oh, so now everyone's talking about me? Your perfect family looking down on me again? At least Chase treats me like a person instead of someone who needs to be fixed." Henry went silent again, made me want to shout. "I'm going to stay at a hotel tonight," he stated finally. "I think we both need some space to think." "Running away again?" I called after him as he packed an overnight bag. "That's what you're at, right? Leaving me alone while you fly off to wherever?" He hesitated at the door. "No, Vicky. I'm not the one running away from our marriage. You are." Then he departed, and I was alone with the echoes of everything I'd said at dinner. Our wedding anniversary was the next week. Henry came home for it, which shocked me. He booked reservations at this steakhouse downtown, not our typical spot, but I felt he was attempting to make up for the stress after the family dinner. Partially out of habit from all those evenings getting dressed up to run into Chase at his bar, and partially in the hopes that he would notice, I spent hours getting ready. The eatery was stunning. Soft lighting and dark wood. Henry made an effort to strike up a conversation while ordering a pricey bottle of wine. When he inquired about the studio, I wished he would have just given me a financial lesson. Somehow, this attempt at normalcy felt worse. Then he presented me with his gift, which he described as a laptop, a useful business-like laptop for the bookkeeping at the studio. It offers every piece of software you want for effective business management. I simply gazed at it. Chase's Instagram story earlier that week included the expensive watch he had purchased for his fiancée on their 6th anniversary. I was struck by the contrast. On our wedding anniversary, my spouse gave me accounting software. My mood was not improved by the wine. Throughout the week, I had been perusing social media and came across messages from Chase about how much he missed his favorite yoga instructor while Henry was away. Like a charge, the laptop sat between us. "You don't get it, dude, do you?" I pushed the laptop out of my way and said, "This is exactly why we're having problems. You think everything can be fixed with spreadsheets and budgets. Vicky, no. Let me finish. You know what Chase got his girlfriend? A watch. A beautiful, thoughtful watch, not some practical office supply." Henry's face was utterly quiet. The wine, the anger, the weeks of accumulating hatred, it all came crashing out. "Why are you so worried about what Chase gives his girlfriend?" "That's not the point. The point is you don't understand me at all. Chase would never what, Vicky? Chase would never treat me like some business problem to solve. He actually sees me as a person, not just some line item in his budget spreadsheet." I cracked out. There was complete silence after he said, "You know what? Sometimes I think I should have married him instead." After giving me a long look, Henry got up slowly and methodically. He simply left me at the restaurant and departed without saying anything. After a few minutes of sitting there in disbelief, I contacted Chase, like I always did when something went wrong. However, Things were different this time. He sounded aloof rather than compassionate as he usually does, saying, "You went too far, Vicky. Way too far. But no, you need to fix this or not, but I can't be your backup plan anymore." He ended the conversation. After staring at my phone, I began sharing ambiguous sayings about settling and true happiness on social media. I had faith that Henry would notice them and understand that he was exaggerating. We might act as if nothing had occurred, and he would return home and apologize for leaving. However, neither that night nor the following one did Henry return home. Silence for 3 days. His parents told me he was taking some time to reflect when I called them. My calls went straight to voicemail when I tried to reach Chase again. He was at work on his Instagram, yet he banned my remarks. I became anxious. This was not the intended course of events. I expected Henry to follow me, to defend me. Instead, Chase was meant to be there to confirm my emotions. When Henry returned, I was by myself in our large home, with only a laptop loaded with business accounting software. He was not alone. He was carrying a manila envelope and had an expression on his face that I had never seen before, not hurt, nor furious, simply finished. As I stood there in my yoga clothes trying to pretend that I hadn't been constantly checking both brothers' social media for 3 days in a row, he placed the envelope on our kitchen counter. He said, "I think you should sit down," in his pilot's voice, which he most likely employed to calm passengers during turbulence. I took a seat. Screenshots of text messages, Instagram direct messages, pictures of Chase and me at the coffee shop across town, security camera stills from his bar that showed us staying late after closing, and bank statements detailing all. The times I had eaten at his bar while Henry was flying were among the documents he began to lay out after opening the envelope. Every detail included times, dates, and locations. Even I thought my voice sounded tiny when I asked, "Chase gave you these?" "He's my brother, Vicky. Did you really think he wouldn't tell me what was going on? He's been keeping me updated for months." The truth struck me like a blow. Henry had known that Chase had been reporting back to him the entire time, including the late-night texts, the covert coffee meetups, and the times Chase had listened to me gripe about Henry. I attempted to sound angry, but my voice came out weak. That's invasion of privacy, instead. "You had your brother spy on me?" He passed another piece of paper across the desk, divorce papers that were already completed and awaiting my signature. "No, Vicky. I had my brother protect me from you." Henry's voice was worn out as he said, "But nothing even happened with Chase. We never, did we? Maybe not physically, but you chose him every time you ran to him instead of talking to me. Every time you compared us, every time you undermined our marriage to get his attention. And then that comment at dinner? I was drunk. It was just a joke." My phone buzzed and I said, "No, it wasn't, and we both know it." I grabbed for it out of instinct, thinking it might be Chase. Rather, it was an Instagram notification that Chase had blocked me. I looked up to see Henry observing me with a knowing, sorrowful expression. Henry whispered softly, "By the way, he's engaged. Has been for 2 months. That designer watch you were so impressed by? It was an engagement gift. He just didn't post about it because he knew you'd make a scene." The room began to spin. Chase was engaged to the woman he hardly talked about on social media. He allowed me to flirt with him so many times, and we had in-depth discussions about understanding and sentiments. Henry went on, "You know what the worst part is? He tried to warn me before the wedding, said you seemed more interested in him than me. But I defended you, told him you were just friendly, that you'd never," he said sheepishly as he gazed at our divorce documents. It was the first time I had ever seen him lose that pilot's poise, and I could see his hands were trembling a little. Abruptly, he said, "The studio's failing, isn't it? You have been depleting our savings because of this." Chase also informed me about the credit cards. I sensed the walls getting closer. They had all been discussing me and comparing notes, but I believed I was in charge. 6 months have passed since then. I'm now living in my friend Melissa's spare room since I can't afford a place of my own. Last month, the studio closed. As it happens, Henry was correct about the significance of those spreadsheets. To pay back the loans I had taken out, the bank took the majority of the equipment. Even Melissa stopped my attempt to blame Henry for not believing in my dream. His lawyer had a field day with those bank statements that showed how I had been spending down our savings, and Henry ended up with the house and the divorce. I lost half of my Instagram following when people discovered that I was no longer a studio owner. When I was unable to organize their workshops or market their products, the majority of my yoga entrepreneurs vanished. The worst thing, in fact, Henry's current girlfriend is one of my old pupils. That excellent physical treatment practice is headed by Samantha. She embodies all the qualities I feigned, including honesty, true support, and financial responsibility. Last week, I noticed them at the supermarket. Not the courteous chuckle he used to give my jokes about Chase, but genuine laughter. Yes, Chase, he is now married. His bride looked stunning in her luxury watch in the engagement pictures. Chase wrote me a letter before they relocated to Chicago for her work. He claimed to have only ever viewed me as a sister-in-law and to have cooperated with my advances while he was obtaining information for Henry. That he had never shown that kind of interest in me, and that all those intense talks we had were only his attempt to shield his brother. Henry was the only reason he was being kind. For the most part, my pals have sided with Henry. They claim that it was cruel of me to make jokes about marrying Chase instead, and that it was clear that I was wrong to flirt with him. Melissa keeps saying things like, learn from our mistakes and take responsibility, even though she's letting me stay with her. The problem is that I continue to believe Henry bears some responsibility for this. Perhaps things might have turned out differently if he had been more present, more understanding of the studio, and more like Chase. Perhaps I wouldn't have needed to search elsewhere for confirmation if he hadn't been so preoccupied with spreadsheets and budgets. This year, Henry's parents are hosting Thanksgiving, according to what I saw on Facebook. Apparently, Samantha is also skilled at cooking, as she mentioned in a post. I suppose my invitation got misplaced in the mail. Chase will be there with his wife, flaunting that dumb watch and their ideal existence. I occasionally ponder what would have happened if I had married Chase rather than Henry. However, I recall the expression on his face as he handed Henry those images, how quickly he betrayed me, and how he had been manipulating me the entire time. At least Henry, never lied about his identity. Ironically, I could have used the laptop Henry bought me for our anniversary to look for a job right now, but I was too proud to acknowledge that he was right about the need for improved business management, so I left it behind when I moved out. Melissa advises that before I start dating again, I should focus on myself and see a therapist. She doesn't realize that I'm not the issue here. I simply married the wrong brother, even if he didn't truly want me in the first place. I drove by our former home the other day. Samantha's and Henry's automobiles were in the same driveway. I could see them cooking together in the kitchen through the window. He was demonstrating something to her on that laptop, most likely showing her how to use the accounting software he had been trying to teach me. They appeared content, at ease, and like they belonged there. I spent an hour crying in my car, not because I miss Henry, I don't really, but because I ended up sleeping on my friend's pull-out couch and teaching basic yoga sessions at the YMCA after having a thriving yoga studio with a pilot husband and a lovely home. What's the worst? I know exactly whose fault it is, deep down, when I'm being completely honest with myself. I simply cannot bring myself to publicly acknowledge it.